A poor rancher risked his life for two Apache women. The chief's decision shocked all. The rancher woke before the sun, as he did every morning, to the soft sounds of the prairie. The faint chirping of birds, the distant lowing of cattle, and the whisper of the wind through dry grass greeted him as he stepped out of his small, weathered cabin. His home was simple, barely more than a shack with a tin roof and wooden walls that creaked in the slightest breeze. But it was his own, though the walls were thin and the floorboards uneven. He felt a sense of peace here that he had never found anywhere else. This land, rugged and untamed, was a part of him, as much as the lines of his weathered face and the calluses on his hands. He pulled on his worn boots and ran his fingers over the rough brim of his hat before heading to the corral. The herd of cattle was scattered across the dry pasture, each animal grazing in silence, as if they understood the quiet rhythm of their master's life. The rancher moved among them with calm familiarity, checking each animal carefully. One had a limping leg, another's coat was dull and rough, signs of a long winter and scarce feed. He sighed, knowing that he had little to spare, yet he would find a way. It had always been this way, survival on the edge, with more work than reward, but always with hope. Breakfast was a modest affair, usually a small portion of cornmeal with a bit of milk if he was lucky. He ate quickly, for there was always work waiting, and the prairie did not care for delays. After eating, he grabbed his tools, a hammer, nails, and a coil of wire. The fence had been damaged during a recent storm, and without it the cattle would wander into the rough terrain where they could be lost, or worse. He worked slowly, methodically, under the rising sun. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his arms ached, but he welcomed the labor. Each nail he hammered in place, each post he secured, felt like a small victory against a world that often seemed indifferent to his efforts. As the day progressed, he took a moment to look around. The land stretched endlessly, hills rolling gently toward distant mountains, and the sky stretched wide and open, a brilliant blue with a few scattered clouds. It was a beautiful place, wild and free, yet unforgiving. Many men had tried to settle here and failed. Few had the patience, the resilience, or the quiet courage to endure the isolation. He had not been wealthy or powerful, but he had something that few others did, a steady heart and an unshakable determination that had carried him through hunger, harsh winters, and lonely nights. Though he lived simply, the rancher's days were not without small pleasures. He enjoyed the sound of water in a nearby stream, the warmth of the sun on his face, and the occasional visit from a passing traveler who would share a story or two. He cherished these moments, fleeting as they were, for they reminded him that life could be gentle, even in the midst of hardship. Often he would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the horizon glow in shades of orange and red, and think about the future. He dreamed not of wealth or recognition, but of a life where he could live honestly and help others if the chance arose. The townsfolk often spoke of danger in hushed tones. They warned of conflicts with nearby Apache tribes, of storms, and of bandits who roamed the unsettled lands. Most settlers had abandoned their claims, retreating to the safety of larger towns. But the rancher had stayed. He knew the risks, yet something within him refused to leave. There was a sense of belonging here that no town, no safe street, could provide. Each day as he walked his land, tended his cattle, and repaired his fences, he felt a connection to the earth and sky that filled his life with quiet purpose. Loneliness was a constant companion, yet he did not see it entirely as a burden. It gave him time to reflect, to plan, and to consider the needs of his animals, his land, and eventually the people who might come into his life. Though he spoke rarely to anyone outside his immediate duties, his mind was always active, thinking of solutions to problems and ways to improve his meager circumstances. There was a rhythm to his existence, and though it was not easy, it was honest. He knew that life was measured not by grand accomplishments, but by small acts of perseverance and integrity. Evenings were the hardest. The fire in his small stove crackled, and he would sit, warming his hands and reflecting on the day. He thought of the meals he had eaten, the animals he had cared for, and the fences he had repaired. Though his life was simple and sometimes harsh, he found satisfaction in these small victories. There was a quiet dignity in working hard, in surviving against the odds, and in maintaining a sense of honor when the world around him often seemed indifferent. In his heart, he knew that courage was not always loud or celebrated. Sometimes it was measured by the willingness to face each day with resolve. One particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, he noticed movement near the edge of his property. A rabbit darted across the brush, followed by the faint sound of snapping twigs. He paused, hand instinctively resting on the worn handle of his knife. The prairie was full of life, some of it harmless, some of it dangerous. Years of experience had taught him to watch, to listen, and to remain calm. Whatever was coming, he would face it with the same steady heart that had carried him this far. His life had not been easy, but he had learned that fear was never a reason to retreat. As night fell, the stars began to appear, one by one shimmering like tiny diamonds against the velvet sky. The rancher felt a sense of awe at the vastness above him, a reminder that life was part of something much greater than himself. He allowed himself a rare moment of peace, knowing that tomorrow would bring the same challenges, the same work, and the same uncertainty. Yet he did not mind. There was meaning in every task, every sunrise, and every quiet moment spent in reflection. This land, this life, had shaped him into a man who could endure, a man who could act with kindness and courage when the moment demanded it. He went to bed that night tired, but content. The wind whispered against the walls of his cabin, carrying the scents of the earth and the distant mountains. Sleep came easily, for he had done his work, tended to his animals, and met the demands of another day with determination. Little did he know that the next morning would bring an event that would test his bravery, his compassion, and his willingness to risk everything for strangers in need. His life, so far marked by quiet endurance, was about to change forever. And though he could not see it yet, the choices he made in the coming days would leave a mark not only on his own life but on the lives of others, in ways that no one could have predicted. The next morning the rancher rose as usual, the sun barely brushing the horizon with its first golden light. He dressed quickly, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside, inhaling the crisp morning air. The prairie stretched endlessly before him, bathed in soft light that made the hills and valleys look gentle, almost peaceful. Yet the rancher knew better. The land was beautiful, yes, but it could be cruel and unforgiving. Today, however, he felt something unusual in the air, a sense of unease that he could not explain. As he moved toward the corral to check on his cattle, he noticed a strange sight near the edge of his property. Two figures, crouched and partially hidden among the brush, seemed out of place in the quiet open land. At first he thought they might be travelers, lost or seeking shelter, but something about their posture made him pause. They were silent, tense and cautious, as if they feared being seen. The rancher's heart quickened, not with fear, but with concern. He had heard stories of bandits and skirmishes, of settlers and tribes clashing, and he knew that anyone found alone in these parts could be in grave danger. Carefully he approached, making sure his movements were slow and non-threatening. He called out gently, "Hello? Are you hurt?" There was no immediate response. The figures remained still, and for a moment he thought they might flee. Then one of them moved slightly, revealing a face pale with exhaustion and streaked with dirt. The rancher realized they were women. Young, fragile-looking, yet their eyes held a strength and resilience that spoke of survival under harsh circumstances. He approached closer, keeping his hands visible to avoid alarming them. "It's all right. You're safe here," he said softly. The women exchanged a quick glance, fear and doubt in their eyes, but neither ran.
They were clearly wary of strangers, and rightly so. The rancher understood.
Life in this part of the world was harsh, and trust was earned, not freely given. He knelt a short distance away, showing that he meant no harm.
"Do you need water? Food?"
"I can help you," he added. Slowly one of the women spoke, her voice trembling. She explained in halting words that they were alone, separated from their group and in need of help. Their clothes were torn, their feet bloodied from long travel, and they carried themselves with the careful caution of those who had seen too much danger. The rancher's heart ached at the sight. He had little to offer, just a small home, a few provisions, and a modest herd of cattle. but he knew he could not turn them away. He gestured for them to follow him, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid startling them. Once inside his yard, he offered water and a tin cup and a piece of bread. The women drank and ate cautiously, as if afraid it might vanish if they trusted too easily. The rancher sat quietly nearby, giving them time, letting them feel safe. He understood that trust could not be rushed, and patience was the only way to earn it. As the morning passed, he assessed their condition. They were wounded, scratches and bruises from travel, and exhaustion that went beyond mere tiredness. He helped wash their cuts with water from a nearby stream, applying a bit of salve from his modest supplies. He spoke in calm, encouraging tones. "You're safe here. Rest. Nothing will harm you while you are on this land." The women listened, their eyes softening slightly, though fear still lingered. The rancher knew that hiding them would not be without risk. Other settlers might see strangers on his property and assume the worst. Worse still, the women's presence might attract unwanted attention from hostile forces. He weighed the danger carefully, but his conscience would not allow him to turn them away. To him, the moral choice was simple: help those in need, no matter the risk to himself. Courage, he had learned, was not the absence of fear, but acting rightly despite it. Throughout the day, he tended to both the women and his duties. He brought water and food, checked on his cattle, and repaired the fence that had been damaged by the storm. The women rested, quietly observing him as he worked. They saw his dedication, the careful way he handled his animals, and the quiet strength in his movements. Slowly, they began to feel a fragile sense of safety, something rare and precious in a land where danger was always near. By evening, the rancher had made a small fire outside his cabin. He cooked a modest meal and shared it with the women, who ate silently but gratefully. The sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red, casting long shadows across the prairie. It was a moment of calm, a brief reprieve from the harshness of the world beyond his land. The rancher sat beside the fire, looking at the stars that began to appear, and felt the quiet hope that he could protect these women, at least for a little while. That night, as the women slept inside his cabin, the rancher stayed outside, keeping watch. The prairie was full of sounds: the rustle of the wind, the distant howl of coyotes, and the gentle snort of his cattle. Yet beneath the natural sounds there was an ever-present tension. He knew that danger could arrive without warning, and he remained alert. Every snap of a twig or distant noise made him pause, hand resting on the handle of his knife. But despite the fear, he felt a quiet pride. He was doing what he believed was right, and that gave him strength. In the days that followed, he continued to care for the women, earning their trust slowly. He shared stories of the land, of the hardships he had faced, and the quiet triumphs that made life meaningful. They listened intently, learning that this man, though poor and alone, possessed a courage and kindness that was rare. In turn, the women began to share small details of their lives, their journey, their tribe, and the struggles they had faced. It was a careful, tentative exchange built on respect and the recognition that each had endured much to survive. The rancher also began to notice changes in the women. Their strength returned gradually, and with it, a confidence in their surroundings. They learned the layout of the ranch, helped with small chores, and even smiled occasionally, something he had not seen in many days. These small victories lifted his spirits. Though his life was humble and the world could be harsh, these moments of human connection, of trust and care, were precious. They reminded him why courage mattered, why kindness mattered, and why risking himself for others could be worth any danger. As wordlessly as they had arrived, the women began to settle into a routine at the ranch. The rancher's days became fuller, not just with work, but with the responsibility of protecting and guiding those in his care. He remained vigilant, knowing that any misstep could bring danger. Yet he also discovered that the act of helping others brought a sense of purpose deeper than any he had felt alone. The quiet fear that had accompanied him for so long was replaced, slowly, with a steady determination to do what was right, no matter the personal cost. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, he found the women sitting quietly outside, watching the horizon. One of them turned to him and whispered a word of thanks, a simple gesture, yet one that carried immense weight. The rancher smiled gently, nodding, understanding that trust and gratitude could be expressed without grand gestures. In that moment, he felt a deep connection to these strangers who had become part of his life, however briefly. And he knew, without doubt, that he would protect them, even if it meant risking everything he had. The days passed, each one a careful balance of work, vigilance, and quiet care. The rancher's courage, patience, and kindness became a steady presence for the women, allowing them to heal, regain strength, and regain hope. And though the world outside was still unpredictable, harsh, and dangerous, within the boundaries of his land there was safety, and there was trust. It was a fragile sanctuary, yet one built on honesty, courage, and the quiet strength of a man who understood that life's worth was measured by the lives we protect, not the wealth we accumulate. The rancher never spoke of fear aloud, though it was always there, a companion to his every decision. Instead, he acted quietly and steadily, ensuring the women's needs were met and that they felt safe. Each day brought challenges, the threat of discovery by neighbors, the uncertainty of the land, and the constant vigilance required, but he faced them all with calm determination. For him, courage was not a choice made in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments of decision, the moments where one could turn away or step forward and do what was right. By the end of the week, the rancher realized that these women were no longer simply strangers in need. They had become a part of his world, a reflection of the good that could exist even in a harsh and dangerous land. Their presence reminded him that life was not merely about survival, but about connection, compassion, and the quiet acts of courage that defined a person. And though he did not know what the future held, he resolved to protect them, no matter the cost, for he understood that some choices, though risky, were worth more than life itself. Word of the rancher's unusual visitors began to spread quietly, like whispers carried by the wind across the prairie. At first it was only a few curious neighbors, cautious and hesitant, who noticed the strange movements near the rancher's property. Some claimed they saw unfamiliar figures walking among the hills in the early morning light. Others thought they caught glimpses of shadows moving around the cabin at odd hours. Soon, the rumors grew louder. People began to talk in hushed voices in the small town, their words carrying fear and suspicion. Many of the settlers had long held mistrust toward the Apache, born from years of conflict and misunderstandings. They did not know the women personally, yet they assumed danger simply because they were outsiders. Stories of attacks, theft, and violence were often exaggerated, told as warnings to children and neighbors alike. Now, those same stories fueled concern. "Did you see the rancher today?" "He's hiding them," one man said quietly to another, glancing over his shoulder as if the mere mention could draw trouble. Others muttered about how foolish he was, risking his life for strangers who might bring harm. The rancher, meanwhile, was unaware of much of the talk. His days were full with tending to the women, caring for the cattle, and repairing fences damaged by the winds and storms. Yet he could sense a change in the air. Neighbors no longer nodded politely when he passed on the road. Their eyes carried suspicion. He overheard distant murmurs when fetching supplies from town. Though he tried not to let it trouble him, he knew the danger was real. These people would not hesitate to act if they believed the rancher had put himself or them at risk. Despite the growing tension, the rancher's focus remained on the women. They were slowly recovering, regaining strength and confidence after days of travel and uncertainty. One of them, who had initially been silent and reserved, began to speak more openly. She told him stories of the journey that brought them here, of the people they had left behind, and the hardships they had endured. Her companion, more cautious and quiet, observed everything with watchful eyes, learning to trust slowly, step by step. The rancher listened carefully to each story, nodding thoughtfully, never judging. He understood that their journey had been long, difficult, and dangerous, and he admired their courage. He knew what it meant to face hardship and uncertainty. Though he had lived a simple life, filled with quiet struggles, he had also endured loneliness, harsh winters, and the constant threat of danger. The women, he realized, had experienced a similar strength, though theirs was expressed in different ways. As the days passed, the whispers of the townspeople became bolder. A few men approached the edge of the rancher's land pretending to check fences or gather firewood, but in truth, they were watching. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the prairie, a group of neighbors gathered near the town saloon. They spoke in low, tense voices about what the rancher was doing. "It's dangerous. He's hiding them." "Anyone could get hurt," one said. Another nodded grimly, adding, "If something happens, it'll be on him." We warned him. The rancher, hearing rumors indirectly, felt a mixture of concern and determination. He knew the women's safety depended on him, and despite the danger from outsiders, he could not abandon them. His heart, built on years of honesty and courage, refused to yield to fear. Every time he thought of the possibility of harm coming to them, he felt a surge of resolve. He reminded himself that kindness was worth risk, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act rightly in spite of it. Life at the ranch grew tense. The women remained cautious, aware of the whispers and the possibility that outsiders might discover them. Yet they also began to trust the rancher more deeply, sensing his genuine concern for their well-being. He shared what little food he had, repaired their clothing, and ensured they were comfortable, all while keeping a careful eye on the horizon. Each day became a delicate balance, caring for them, maintaining his land, and staying vigilant against potential threats. One afternoon, while tending to the cattle, the rancher noticed footprints along the edge of the property. They were not his own, nor did they belong to the women. Someone had approached the ranch, leaving signs that could not be ignored. His heart pounded as he considered the possibilities. Were these neighbors? Bandits, or someone else entirely? He approached cautiously, examining the tracks, and determined that they were human, recent, and likely meant to observe rather than confront directly. The rancher knew that confrontation could come at any moment. He prepared quietly, ensuring the women were inside the cabin and safe. He checked his small supply of food and water, moved tools that could serve as weapons within reach, and kept a watchful eye on the surrounding land. Every sound, the rustle of grass, the call of a distant bird, the whisper of wind, was magnified in his mind, each one a possible signal of approaching danger. Yet even amid fear, he felt a steady confidence. He had faced storms, loneliness, and the harshness of the land before, and he would face this too. Meanwhile, the women continued to heal, learning to move more confidently across the ranch and tending to small chores. The younger, more talkative woman began to teach the rancher simple words from her language, while her companion shared knowledge of the land, plants, and survival techniques. They were careful not to reveal too much to the outside world, but the exchange strengthened their bond. The rancher marveled at their resilience. They were not helpless, but strong and wise in ways that complemented his own skills and courage. Despite this growing trust, the weight of potential danger pressed heavily upon him. He knew the community could not easily understand his actions. Most settlers would see only the surface, a poor man harboring strangers from a tribe they did not fully understand. Fear could make people cruel, and he worried about what might happen if the wrong person discovered the women. He spent long nights planning contingencies, considering ways to protect them, and praying quietly for safety. His mind raced with possibilities, but his resolve never wavered. One morning, a stranger from the town rode slowly past the ranch, pretending to check fences but clearly observing. The rancher watched from a distance, heart steady but alert. He knew that curiosity could easily turn into confrontation. He prepared himself, not with anger, but with careful thought. If approached directly, he would speak calmly, explain the situation if necessary, and protect the women without resorting to violence unless unavoidable. His courage was measured, not reckless, rooted in principle rather than bravado. Days turned into a week, and tension grew. The townspeople's curiosity became more insistent. Some began asking questions directly, trying to gauge whether the rancher had truly taken in the women, while others whispered warnings, suggesting he might be bringing trouble upon them all. He responded politely but cautiously, never confirming too much, always careful to maintain safety and discretion. The women noticed the tension and expressed concern, but the rancher reassured them. "Do not worry," he said quietly. "I will keep you safe. Nothing will harm you here. This period of uncertainty tested not only his courage but also his patience. He could not act hastily, for rash actions might endanger them. Instead, he relied on observation, careful planning, and quiet vigilance. He monitored the movements of neighbors and travelers, anticipating potential problems. Each day required judgment, balance, and an understanding that every decision could carry consequences far beyond what he could predict. Yet through it all, he never faltered. His sense of right and wrong guided him, and his determination to protect the women gave him strength beyond what he thought possible. By the end of the second week, the rancher had begun to feel a cautious optimism. Though danger still loomed, he had learned to navigate it, balancing the women's recovery with the vigilance required to protect them. He also began to notice a subtle change in the women. They laughed more, moved with greater confidence, and showed small acts of kindness in return. Their presence enriched his life, providing companionship and a sense of shared purpose he had not experienced before. The bond between them grew quietly, built on trust, respect, and mutual care. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues of orange and gold, he reflected on the past days. Fear and tension had been constant companions, yet they had not dominated him. He had faced uncertainty, judgment, and potential danger, and he had chosen compassion. That choice, he realized, defined him far more than the hardships of his life or the scarcity of his possessions. Courage, he understood, was measured not by the absence of fear, but by the willingness to act rightly despite it. And so, the rancher prepared for the next challenge, unaware that soon a confrontation would arise that would test the limits of his bravery, his compassion, and his ability to protect those he had come to care for. The whispers of the townspeople, the subtle observations, and the growing tension in the community were only the beginning. A greater test was coming, one that would determine not just the safety of the women, but the reputation, honor, and courage of a man who had risked everything for strangers in need. The morning air was crisp and still, a quiet that seemed almost unnatural after the past weeks of tension. The rancher moved cautiously outside, checking on his cattle as he always did. But a strange unease settled in his chest. The prairie, normally so familiar, now seemed to hold secrets just beyond his sight. He had learned to trust his instincts, and this time they told him that something significant was approaching. He could feel it before he saw it, a presence in the distance, deliberate and purposeful, moving with careful intent across the land. From the far edge of his property, a figure appeared, riding slowly on a sturdy horse. He was not alone. Behind him others followed at a measured distance, and the rancher immediately recognized the stance and bearing of men and women trained in vigilance and respect. The lead rider was tall, with sharp, piercing eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the land and its surroundings. There was an authority in his posture, a quiet command that required no words. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest. He knew, without a doubt, that this was the Apache chief, come to investigate the whereabouts and safety of the two women under his care. The rancher felt a wave of tension and fear, but it was mingled with determination. He had done nothing wrong in his mind. He had offered safety and care to those in need, but the confrontation he knew was inevitable could bring danger. He quickly ensured the women were inside the cabin, hidden but able to observe if necessary. Their eyes met his, filled with worry and silent questions. He gave them a reassuring nod, hoping to convey his intentions without words. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Everything will be all right." As the chief approached the rancher, the animals sensed the tension and became restless, shifting nervously in the corrals. The wind carried a faint scent of sage and dust from the chief's journey, a reminder that these visitors belonged to a world with rules and codes far older than the settlements nearby. The rancher stepped forward, hands visible, meeting the chief's gaze with steady eyes. His own heart raced, yet he spoke with calm respect. "Welcome," he said quietly. "You are safe here." The chief dismounted gracefully, every movement deliberate, every glance assessing the situation. His eyes softened slightly as they fell upon the women, who now stood carefully behind the rancher, watching the exchange with cautious hope. The chief spoke, his voice firm but measured.
"These are your people," he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly.
The rancher nodded. Yes. They were in need. I could not leave them alone. The moment of silence followed. The chief studied the rancher closely, noting the dirt-streaked face, the rough hands, and the tired but determined posture. This man, though poor and seemingly ordinary, had risked much for the women under his care. There was no deception in his eyes, no attempt to hide the truth. Only honesty and courage, plain and simple. The chief's expression remained serious, but there was a spark of recognition, a recognition that true bravery was often quiet, unseen and measured in actions rather than words. The rancher took a deep breath, sensing the gravity of the moment. He explained the women's situation, their injuries, and how he had cared for them. He spoke plainly, without exaggeration, emphasizing his desire to protect them and ensure their safety. I knew the risk, he said, but I could not abandon them. I did what I believed was right. The chief listened carefully, never interrupting, his gaze steady and unwavering. Each word was weighed, each gesture observed. For a long moment, the chief said nothing. The rancher held his breath, feeling the weight of the silence pressing upon him. It was a silence that could have held judgment, anger, or even violence. Yet instead, the chief took a step closer, eyes still on the rancher. Then, slowly, he nodded. It was a simple gesture, but one heavy with meaning, respect, recognition, approval. The rancher felt a surge of relief, though he did not let it show fully. He knew the situation was delicate, and the chief's decision, though favorable, would ripple through the surrounding community in unexpected ways. The chief then addressed the women, speaking in a language the rancher did not fully understand. The women responded, their voices cautious but clear. The rancher watched, realizing that trust and communication were being rebuilt not just between him and the chief, but also between the women and their leader. The chief's expression softened further as he turned back to the rancher. "You have shown courage and honor," he said through a translator, or perhaps in words the rancher understood plainly. "You risked your life for others. That is the measure of a good man." The words struck the rancher deeply. He had never sought recognition, only the satisfaction of doing what was right. Yet hearing such acknowledgment from a leader of the women's people, someone who held authority and wisdom, filled him with an unexpected pride. It was not pride in wealth or status, he had neither, but pride in the choices he had made, in the humanity he had shown when faced with danger. The chief's approval was a validation of everything he believed about courage, compassion, and honor. Neighbors and townspeople who had gathered at a cautious distance witnessed the exchange. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they watched the chief nod in respect, rather than anger or punishment. Shock and disbelief spread quickly. Many had expected a violent confrontation, a punishment for the rancher's perceived folly. Instead, they saw respect, a recognition that transcended fear and prejudice. The sight left them uneasy, uncertain of how to respond to a man they had judged so harshly. The chief spoke again, this time to the women, instructing them that they would return to their tribe but that they were safe because of the rancher's actions. The women, their faces a mixture of relief and gratitude, stepped forward briefly to bow or nod toward the rancher, acknowledging the life-saving protection he had provided. It was a quiet, profound moment, one that needed no grand gestures or words. The trust, care, and courage of one man had ensured the safety of others, and that truth was clear to all who witnessed it. The rancher, feeling both relief and humility, watched the chief mount his horse. The women followed, their steps steady and confident, supported by their leader's presence. The rancher knew this was not the end of his connection to them. Their story, the trust he had earned, and the recognition of his courage would remain a part of his life forever. He had acted not for reward or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Yet now, in the eyes of the chief and the women, he had received something even more meaningful than material wealth, a measure of honor that could never be taken away. As the group moved across the prairie, the rancher reflected on the lessons of the past days. He had faced danger, judgment, and fear, yet he had acted with integrity. He realized that courage was not always measured in dramatic acts, but in the quiet decisions to help others despite personal risk. Compassion, he understood, was often misunderstood by those who lacked the perspective to see it. And trust, once earned, could bridge even the widest divides between people and cultures. Returning to his cabin, the rancher felt a deep sense of peace. The threat was gone, the women were safe, and the chief had left him with an unspoken acknowledgement of his bravery. The neighbors would likely continue to whisper and speculate, but their opinions no longer mattered as much. What mattered was the knowledge that he had done right, that he had acted with courage, and that he had upheld a standard of humanity that could withstand fear and prejudice alike. The prairie, once again calm and silent, seemed to honor the resolution. The cattle grazed quietly. The wind carried the scent of sage and grass, and the sky stretched wide above him, clear and bright. The rancher stood for a moment, taking it all in, understanding that this chapter of his life had changed him profoundly. He had discovered strengths within himself that he had never tested before, and he had earned the respect of those who mattered most, the women he had protected, and the chief who recognized his courage. Though the world beyond his land might still be harsh and uncertain, he now carried a quiet confidence. He knew that true courage was measured not in how much one could avoid danger, but in how much one could act rightly in its presence. And in that knowledge he found not only peace, but a deep satisfaction that no hardship, no threat, and no misunderstanding could take away. The rancher returned to his daily routines, tending to his land and cattle, but now with a renewed sense of purpose. His life, though still humble, had been touched by profound events that reminded him of the power of compassion, courage, and honor. He had risked everything for strangers, and in doing so he had discovered the extraordinary strength that lies within ordinary people. And though the chief, the women, and the events of those days would eventually move on, the lessons, the trust, and the quiet pride in doing what was right would remain with him. After the chief and the women had departed, the rancher stood for a long moment on his porch, watching the distant figures disappear over the rolling hills. The land seemed unchanged, vast and silent, yet everything felt different to him. The past days, full of fear, tension, and responsibility, had transformed his life. He had faced danger, earned trust, and acted with courage and compassion. The events had left an imprint on his heart, a quiet pride that could not be measured in wealth or possessions. Neighbors and townspeople who had once whispered behind his back now approached him with curiosity, respect, and even admiration. The story of what had happened at his ranch spread slowly, growing with each retelling, though always anchored in the truth of his actions. People were surprised, some even shocked, that a man so poor and unassuming could risk his life to protect strangers, and that his bravery had been recognized by the Apache chief himself. It was a lesson to all who watched. Courage and honor are not measured by wealth or power, but by the choices one makes. Life on the ranch slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The cattle grazed in the pastures, the fences stood repaired, and the wind swept across the hills in familiar patterns. Yet the rancher's perspective had changed. He noticed small things that had gone previously unnoticed: the delicate curve of a new sprout pushing through the dry soil, the songs of birds returning after a storm, the way sunlight filtered through the clouds in golden streams. He had always respected the land, but now he understood more deeply how life, courage, and compassion intertwined with it. The rancher also reflected on the women who had entrusted their safety to him. Though they had returned to their tribe, their impact lingered. He thought of their bravery, their trust, and the strength it had taken for them to survive alone in a harsh world. Their gratitude had been quiet yet profound, and it remained in his heart. He realized that even brief moments of connection, acts of care, and small gestures of courage could leave lasting impressions, more enduring than any material wealth or recognition. Some days, he walked the perimeter of his land, imagining the women's safe journey back to their people. He wondered if they would tell others of the man who had risked everything to help them, and whether the lessons of courage and compassion would ripple outward through their tribe and his community alike. He hoped so, quietly, without seeking credit. The true reward, he knew, was the knowledge that he had done the right thing, even when it was difficult and dangerous. That knowledge gave him a sense of fulfillment that no amount of comfort or prosperity could provide. The rancher's story became a quiet legend in the surrounding area. Travelers passing through would hear whispers about the man who had sheltered strangers, cared for them in secret, and faced the fear of his neighbors and the unknown with steady courage. Children were told the tale in hushed tones, not as a warning, but as a lesson in bravery, compassion, and the importance of doing what is right, even when it comes at personal risk. The rancher himself did not seek attention or accolades, but he could not help but feel a quiet satisfaction knowing that his actions had inspired others. Despite the admiration of some neighbors, the rancher remained humble and unassuming. He continued to wake early each morning, care for his cattle, repair fences, and maintain his modest home. The daily routines, once simply a necessity for survival, now carried deeper meaning. Each action was a reminder of resilience, courage, and the quiet dignity of honest labor. He understood that life's value was measured not by wealth or fame, but by the care and integrity with which one treated others and the world around them. Over time, he also noticed subtle changes in the community's attitudes. The initial whispers of suspicion had faded, replaced with cautious respect. Some settlers began to speak to him openly, seeking advice or assistance. They were still wary of outsiders as the world was harsh, but the story of his courage had planted seeds of understanding. They saw that fear and prejudice could be challenged by acts of kindness and bravery. Slowly, the rancher became a symbol, not because he sought it, but because his actions had shown others a different way to approach life, danger, and trust. The rancher often reflected on the role of the Apache chief in this story. That leader had recognized the courage and integrity in a man who might otherwise have been judged harshly. The chief's decision to respect rather than punish was a lesson that lingered with the rancher. It reminded him that honor and trust could bridge differences, that courage and integrity were recognized across cultures, and that the right actions, even when misunderstood by others, could have profound and lasting effects. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the prairie was bathed in golden light, the rancher stood outside, looking over his land. Memories of the past weeks flowed through his mind. The fear, the challenges, the small victories, and the moment of recognition from the chief. He felt a sense of completeness, a deep understanding that his life, though simple, had meaning. He had faced the unknown with courage, protected the vulnerable, and acted with honor. In doing so, he had not only changed the lives of the two women, but had also changed himself in ways that could never be undone. The prairie seemed to hum with quiet approval, the wind carrying the scent of sage and dry grass. The rancher felt connected to the land, the animals, the people who lived nearby, and even to the distant tribe of the women he had helped. It was a sense of unity that transcended fear, suspicion, and hardship. He understood that life was fragile, that danger was always present, and that every decision mattered. And yet he also knew that courage, compassion, and honor were timeless, enduring principles that could guide anyone through even the most uncertain times. The rancher's life continued, shaped by this experience but not defined solely by it. He carried on with his work, tending the cattle, repairing fences, and keeping his land in order. Yet, he was changed internally. He noticed small acts of kindness more readily, valued honesty and integrity even in difficult situations, and understood more deeply the quiet strength required to face fear without succumbing to it. The experience had been a trial, but one that had enriched him, strengthened him, and given him a profound sense of purpose. Years passed, and though the rancher remained humble and simple in his lifestyle, his story continued to ripple outward. Travelers shared tales of his bravery. Settlers spoke of his courage, and the story of a poor man risking everything to protect two women from danger became a symbol of hope and integrity. The rancher never sought to profit from this recognition. Instead, he focused on living honorably, teaching, by example, that true courage lies in action, not in reputation, and that compassion is a strength, not a weakness. He often thought of the women he had helped, wondering how their lives had unfolded and whether they remembered the small, quiet man who had risked everything to protect them. He imagined them walking safely among their people, sharing their story of trust, bravery, and unexpected kindness. In his heart, he felt a connection that could not be broken by distance or time. That bond, forged in the crucible of danger and compassion, was a lasting testament to the power of human goodness. Even in the simplest moments, feeding the cattle, repairing a fence, Walking along the stream, the rancher remembered the lessons he had learned. Courage was often quiet, subtle, and unacknowledged, but it mattered more than wealth or comfort. Compassion required risk and patience, but it was always worthwhile. Integrity demanded honesty, even when others doubted or feared, and it left a legacy far richer than any material possession. These truths became the guiding principles of his life, shaping his actions, his thoughts, and his interactions with the world around him. In the end, the rancher's story became more than an account of bravery. It became a lesson for all who heard it. It showed that ordinary people, even those with little wealth or influence, could perform extraordinary acts of courage and compassion. It illustrated the power of trust, the importance of moral conviction, and the profound impact of acting rightly, even when misunderstood. And it left a lasting impression on the land, the people, and the generations who would hear the tale long after the rancher himself was gone. The prairie, silent and enduring, bore witness to all of it. The hills, the streams, and the open skies held the memory of courage, the echo of quiet bravery, and the spirit of a man who had risked everything to protect life. And in that memory the rancher lived on, not through fame or wealth, but through the enduring values he had embodied: courage, compassion, honor, and integrity.